So there have been other sessions at this conference that have gone over the Google Drive roadmap in detail. I'll flash those session IDs up in a few slides if you want to go back and look at the videos from those. This particular session is some detail about how you can save on IT content storage costs using Drive, regardless whether you're using an existing on-premise filer, network-attached storage, on-premise SharePoint, or one of our competitors like Box or Dropbox. This presentation is all about the dollars and cents, so I hope you like dollars and cents. Okay, so throughout this presentation, we are going to use a very realistic but hypothetical customer, creatively named Acme Holdings Incorporated. They're a global enterprise with 20,000 employees. They have $3 billion in annual revenue. They operate in most regions around the world. Like most companies, their productivity and content platform is still hosted on-premise. In the session, we'll diverge from the hypothetical, and we'll actually give you a comparison against Dropbox and Box. But when we total up the numbers in the scenario here, the assumption is that Acme is using an on-premise system. And then key to the economic model that you're going to see in a minute, we're assuming that Acme stores 25 gigabytes of productivity data on average over the course of the year per user. Now, in this respect, this scenario diverges a little bit from the average case because we're trying to make the numbers that we're showing you really conservative. The average company in this segment stores 15 gigabytes of data per employee average over the course of the year. For this presentation, we're using 25 gigabytes. That makes the scenario conservative so that if your organization chooses to adopt Google Drive, you can be confident of realizing savings at least what we're going to show you here. So like Acme, like most companies, as you'll see in this presentation, Acme overpays for storage. And the savings that they're going to realize are well into the 8 figures when we total it up by the end of this presentation. There are multiple reasons that Acme is overpaying for storage. Number one, seat-based licensing models that are prevalent in the industry require Acme to pay regardless whether their users are actually using the software. And if you think about your existing enterprise content management system, something like SharePoint, these are some of the least adopted solutions that IT has ever rolled out. But you're paying for those seat licenses regardless whether your employees actually use the software. Number two, you have to budget for on-prem storage, redundancy, data durability, read and write throughput, significantly in excess of what your users actually store. Then on top of that, you have maintenance, support, migration costs, and then many indirect costs that are very real when your CEO is looking at the business. So we're going to break that down and show you how Drive Enterprise solves for those excessive costs. When we, 3 years ago, set out to build Drive Enterprise and make it the leading cloud content platform in the industry, we didn't just think about the feature set. We also thought about what is the business model that would make Drive Enterprise the most customer-friendly, the most affordable solution in the industry. So we've done both of those. And this presentation is going to focus on the economics and the business model, but I want to just do a quick sidebar for anyone in the audience who's not familiar on what Drive Enterprise is and what this feature set is to catch everyone up, and then we're going to go into the economics. So number one, why this might be interesting to you, and then I'm going to give you the specifics of what it is. This would be appealing to you if you're really intrigued about the potential for G Suite to transform your organization, make your organization more nimble, more collaborative, to appeal with the new generation that's coming into the workforce who have probably used G Suite in school. But the prospect of the change management to get off of legacy email and calendar solutions is just too much for you. So if you want the collaboration and you want the transformation, but changing email and calendar sounds daunting, Drive Enterprise is likely the right answer for you. Drive Enterprise is Google Drive plus Docs, Sheets, and Slides plus our top-tier security, compliance, and identity features from the G Suite Enterprise SKU and nothing else. sold as its standalone SKU. There isn't Gmail, there isn't Calendar, there isn't Hangouts, Chat, Meet, and so forth. It's really a dedicated offering that's a cloud content platform that's designed to coexist with the rest of your IT environment. Now, if you're familiar with Drive, possibly your kids have used it in school, or you use Drive in your personal life, you might have some healthy skepticism, which is okay, about whether Drive really can replace your existing ECM system. If you've only used Drive in your personal life or seen it in your kids' school, you haven't seen the full enterprise-grade version of Google Drive. So I'm going to run through 6 quick bullets. Like I said, there are 2 other hours of presentations at this conference that go into detail about all of these capabilities, but we're going to try to do this in 2 minutes and show you how Drive really can replace your legacy ECM platform. Number 1, we've rebuilt Drive from the inside out to be enterprise grade. At this conference not last year, 2 years ago, we announced the availability of something called Team Drives, which is actually an enterprise-specific content repository in Drive. That was a rebuild of Drive from the needs of consumers for the needs of enterprise, from the storage layer all the way up to the API. Most of the user interface was able to stay the same, keeping the ease of use that you know from your consumer life, but everything under the hood has changed to be enterprise grade. Along with this, we launched a new version of our sync client called Drive File Stream that's just for enterprise accounts that allows you to mount Drive as if it were a network file share. So you might have F:\/ in your organization right now, and F:\/ might be served by an existing on-prem NetApp or EMC filer. On Friday night, when your employees leave for the weekend, all their content is on F:\/. Over the weekend, our AppBridge team, which is the leading migration vendor which we acquired 2 years ago, AppBridge comes in, they migrate all your content to Drive, we roll out Drive File Stream in your organization. 9 a.m. Monday morning, your employees come back, and what's F:\/? They just think it's the existing NetApp or EMC filer. All their content's right there. There's no change management, no retraining that needs to be done. But what's actually happened under the hood is that the content has moved to Drive. You've mounted Drive as a remote network file share. Everything works seamlessly for your employees. But now when one of your executives happens to be on the beach for vacation and they need access to some work content, they don't have their corp laptop, they can't get on VPN, they're stuck, they call you. You tell them, pull up your mobile phone, go into your Drive app, and all your content's there. It's an absolutely magical experience, and it's been rebuilt from the ground up for enterprise. Number 2, because the Drive Enterprise SKU is sold without Gmail and without Calendar, we know that an overriding concern for you is this has to interoperate with the rest of my Microsoft solutions. So when I picked up management of the Drive team, one of my top priorities was something that I creatively called Awesomeness for Office. We needed to make Drive work incredibly well with your existing Office tools. We've rolled out a number of marquee features here. I'll give you just a couple of quick highlights. The animated GIF that you're seeing here is a feature that launched to general availability at this conference that allows you in Google Docs, Sheets, and Slides to open up a Word, PowerPoint, or Excel file, the real version of that file, not converting it into the corresponding Docs, Sheets, or Slides format. Edit it in Docs, Sheets, or Slides from your desktop, from your mobile phone, collaborating in real time with the machine learning, artificial intelligence, grammar suggestions, with real-time collaboration and all the other features of Google Docs without converting the file format, no multiple versions created. So that's an excellent example of Office interoperability that launched to GA at this conference. Number 2, the feature you see there mentioned called Presence. If you're not using Docs, Sheets, and Slides, if you're using the real versions of Word, PowerPoint, and Excel that are installed on your end users' machines, and you're storing your content in Drive, Drive user interface now pops up inside of Word, PowerPoint, and Excel and says, oh, hey, Alex, you might not want to edit this file right now because Jim has it open and he's actively making changes. Then Jim saves his version, my version updates on my screen. And if we happen to make changes at the same time, the Drive interface pops up inside of Word, PowerPoint, and Excel, gives me a side-by-side diff view of the 2 conflicting edits, allows me to reconcile that, and then get everyone back on the same page. We have a plugin into Outlook now, and you can do Google-style collaborative commenting on Office files across platforms, and it all integrates together perfectly. So say that a lawyer on my team has sent me a red line of a contract, and he uses Word because he's on the legal team, and he's going to keep using Word, but I use Google Docs, and I use Drive. I can pull up that Word file in the Drive UI, whether it's on my mobile phone or on my desktop. I can highlight a sentence and say, I'm not so confident about this indemnity language. I can mention him in the comment. He'll get a ping on his mobile phone. He could reply to my comment right on his mobile phone, but what's even better, the comment gets written into the file so that when he pulls up the file in his real version of Word, he sees the comment in the real version of Word. He can reply to me there, and I'm going to get a notification back on my mobile phone, or I'll even get the notification in Slack if I'm using Slack. So we've built a bunch of interoperability features. We have dedicated sessions on this if you want to learn more. Number 3, obviously for Drive to be enterprise grade, it's got to be secure, and we've made major investments here. We have machine learning and artificial intelligence powered data loss prevention that will identify whether any of your content has credit card numbers or social security numbers in it, or has other sensitive language like the words, confidential or top secret, and will prevent that from being shared outside the organization. Drive file stream and the Drive mobile app now support mobile device management, so you can remotely revoke or wipe a device that a user might have lost. This Drive Enterprise SKU comes with the Security Center from G Suite, which allows you to identify and remediate security issues and security breaches, many sharing controls. We even support end-to-end encryption. So if you're subject to regulations like EAR, where you need to be able to place content in Drive with the confidence that Google's SRE or operations people under no circumstances could ever see any of that plain text, you can use end-to-end encryption with Google Drive. We also have physical security keys that you can plug into your end user's laptop that essentially take phishing and malware attacks to zero. So that's security. Point number 4, if you've only ever used Drive in a personal or the context from your kid's school, you might have the assumption that it's hard to securely share to users if they don't have a Google account. You either have the option of turning on link sharing, which can be forwarded to anyone, or you can share to a named user, but the email address that you're sharing has to have a Google account. At this conference, we've announced and started to roll out a new feature called PIN verified visitor sharing that works the same way your online banking system works, where you try to share to an email address, that email address doesn't have a Google account associated. To you as the sender, you don't have to know whether they have a Google account or not. You just punch in the email address. As the end user, when you click in and try to get access to that content, what happens is that a challenge PIN is going to get sent to the email address we have on file for you, and you have to enter that PIN to get access to the content. And that means that you can't forward that invitation to anyone else and have that user get access. So this completely takes away any concerns about whether it's easy to share with people outside of your organization, your partners, your suppliers, or vendors, if they don't have Google accounts. Next to last, we did a session yesterday with Andrew Plunkett, who's the VP of Digital Workforce at Airbus, and our new strategic partners, K2, Nintex, and DocuSign, announcing major new metadata and workflow capabilities for Google Drive. So the metadata rollout started at this conference. This allows you to attach structured tags and labels to your content in Drive. For example, if you're a legal team, you can create content categories in Drive, like for a contract, that allow you to track which regional legal regime is relevant to every contract. Is this a European contract? Is it an American contract? Are the indemnities standard or non-standard? Is this our paper, or is this the customer's paper? And then in the structured search, advanced search area in Drive, you can run faceted structured searches across your entire corpus, no matter what team Drive that content is stored in. In June, we'll start to roll out the approvals capability you see here, which is the #1 issue that historically blocked people from migrating off of SharePoint and onto Drive, is you have to be able to pull those lightweight approval workflows into Drive. For example, You can't get the sales proposal out to a customer until the sales proposal has been approved by sales finance. That capability is rolling out to Drive starting in June, works across desktop and mobile, and it's really seamless. K2 Nintex and DocuSign are bringing their more advanced workflow capabilities to the right-hand side rail of Drive. For example, if you're using these companies for business process management in a regulated industry, like mortgage approval workflows, that can now seamlessly integrate with content stored in Drive. And finally, and I think this is most important, let's think about what was the original promise of ECM systems. The reason ECM systems started to get rolled out 20 years ago is that you realized as a business leader that your organization has this wealth of knowledge that seems to just be collecting dust. You're not taking advantage of that. You have people across divisions that are reworking content. People aren't making connections and identifying the information that they need to get their job done. ECM systems like SharePoint promised that they were going to solve this problem, but I'll show you some statistics in a few slides that I think everyone here intuitively knows, which is that ECM systems have failed and not been adopted. And the reason they haven't been adopted is that they require your end users to do all the work, to set up all the tags and the labels and do all the categorization, and you chide and scold people to try to keep their content libraries up to date. But no, I'm seeing head shaking in the audience. Right, no one does that. And these systems are constantly out of date. With Drive, our strategic mission is to deliver on that promise, but without putting the onus of all the manual work on the end user. What we do, and I'll go into a little bit more detail, is we use Google's deep neural net machine learning systems to identify for every user who are the collaborators that matter to them, what are the topics that are relevant to them, what are the topics they're working on right now, and we proactively bubble up the knowledge that they need to get their job done without putting the onus on the user. And I'll show you some stats in a few slides, but these are the most successful machine learning launches that G Suite has ever done. So that is what Drive Enterprise is. It's much more than you might be familiar with from your personal life. It really is an enterprise-grade content platform. You don't have to only take my word for it. The analysts clearly agree. If you get a copy of the Forrester Wave or the Gartner Magic Quadrant reports, these reports now clearly identify Google Drive as one of the leaders in the space. If you want to learn more about these, jump on YouTube, look up these specific sessions. I'll pause here just for a second in case anyone wants to take a picture of that screen. And then we will end our sidebar about what Drive Enterprise is, and now we're going to get into the 9 a.m. accounting session. Okay, so if you're thinking about replacing your existing on-premise content platform like SharePoint or a Dropbox or Box installation, there are two kinds of costs that you can expect to save with Drive Enterprise. Number one are the direct costs. These are the bills you get every month or every quarter from your supplier that we can significantly reduce or make go away entirely when you get onto Google Drive. The second category of costs that we save are the indirect costs. You don't get a bill for these every month, but if you have a data breach, that data breach is sure going to have some expense associated with remediating it. And if your employees are wasting hours every week, there are obviously payroll costs associated with that. So we're going to go through the direct costs. We'll go through the indirect costs. We'll total up the direct. We'll total up the indirect. All of this will be in the scenario that we discussed, Acme Corporation. I'll also put this in percentage terms so that if your organization isn't the exact same size or profile as Acme, you can get an intuitive sense of what this might be for you. So number one, the first way that we can save you costs are on seat licensing models. Seat licensing models, I think, are one of the worst aspects of this industry. You might have major seasonal variation in your workforce. Say that you're a finance firm and you have a tax practice. If you have a tax practice, this time of year, your workforce might double or triple in size. And the way seat-based licensing models work, you have to buy licenses for all those employees, and you likely negotiate an annual or a 3-year contract, and you're paying for those employees regardless whether they're there every quarter, every month of the year. And you can see that almost half of organizations have significant seasonal variation in their workforce. Seat-based licensing in no way accommodates this. Even aside from seasonal variation in workforce, most organizations don't use their seat licenses fully. You can see, if you look on the left-hand side, the expectation of CIOs is that only 70% of their seat licenses will get used. On the right-hand side, you can see the reality. Based on surveys, it's actually worse than that. Only 62% of seat licenses typically get used. And you can intuitively understand the reason for this. People are sick, they go on vacation, they go on baby bonding leave. But also, projects are cyclical. Not every project needs every tool at every stage of its life cycle. You might need Drive a lot right now. You might need it less next month, given where your project is in its life cycle. Seat-based licensing models assume that the activity across a project life cycle is constant the entire time. Also, seat-based licensing models assume that the tools are easy enough for your users to use and that they're going to get adopted. And we know that that's not true. So look at these stats for OneDrive and SharePoint. The active usage of these existing content platforms is abysmal. When I gave a version of this presentation at this conference last year, I was trying to understand what the 40% satisfaction number for SharePoint meant, and tax season was on my mind. And I looked at what the satisfaction for the IRS is. The satisfaction for the IRS is higher than the satisfaction for SharePoint, right? Obviously not a loved system, and you see it reflected here in active usage. But with the seat-based licensing model, you're buying this for the entire organization and having to take a bet as the buyer that this is going to get utilized. In comparison with Drive Enterprise, you do not pay for unused seats. We are taking all the risk on ourselves, and we're aligning all of the incentives. One thing that I've heard from many customers and partners is that you get amazing engagement from your vendor in the pre-sales process. They show you all the love, and then you ink the deal, and what happens? Where are they? Well, you've just signed a commitment, and now incentives are not aligned. They're going to get paid regardless whether your employees are successful with the product or not. And with Drive Enterprise, because you don't pay for unused seats, we are completely putting ourselves on the hook to make sure that this is a great experience for your users. We're completely aligning the incentives. So number one, you only pay for monthly active users. You don't pay for seat licenses. And we are pretty stringent with ourselves on what counts as an active user. Say you install Drive File Stream on an end user's machine, that end user puts content in Drive, and every day Drive File Stream is sitting there and doing some syncing back and forth and seeing whether any content has updated. That user does not get charged as active. If the user just goes and logs into drive.google.com or opens the mobile app, they don't get charged as active. The user actually has to go into the product and get some value out of it and do something meaningful. Create a piece of content, share with someone. That's what gets them counted as active. There's another component of this pricing that you see called out there in green, which is $1 per 25 gigabytes, and I want to explain that. If you buy from Dropbox or Box, that is rolled right into your seat-based licensing, that storage cost, and what that means is that you are overpaying. So from a human psychology point of view, unlimited sounds great, right? Like, who doesn't like unlimited? It's some peace of mind. I'm not going to have to worry about it. But if you are like 98% of corporations, and this is based on real data that we have within Google, if you're like 98% of corporations, you are overpaying if you're buying unlimited storage. The dirty secret of this industry is that if you're buying unlimited storage, what you're actually doing is subsidizing abusers. If you think about everyone getting unlimited storage, and you're an average company that uses 15 gigabytes per year per user, there are going to be some companies that are way off the right-hand tail of that distribution, and those companies that are all the way out there, they might be using a terabyte per user, but they're paying the same price as you. And if they're paying the same price as you, that means you are effectively subsidizing them. So if you're buying unlimited storage, you're overpaying. If you're like 90% of organizations, you can pay $1 per 25 gigabytes and save an enormous amount of money. The average company in this space stores 15 gigabytes. In this whole scenario that we're showing you, we've modeled Acme Corporation as storing 25 gigabytes of data. If you dig into that for Acme Corporation, assuming that they store 25 gigabytes of data, that $1 per 25 gigabytes only works out to be 11% of their total bill. So you don't need to dramatically overpay for unlimited to get peace of mind for something that's 11% of your overall bill. This is not a major line item that you need to optimize. Okay, we'll keep going from here and net out the total cost savings if you're using the Drive Enterprise active seats, pay for what you use model versus box. Multiplying out for box, $6 million. For Drive, $1.5 million, a 75% cost savings because of this business model. Now, I really hope that our move to consumption-based pricing drives the entire industry in this direction, because this is the customer-friendly way to charge. Now, this scenario that we just went through is if your organization is looking at, like say, Drive versus Dropbox or Box. Now let's think about the situation that I outlined at the beginning, where Acme is using on-prem solutions like SharePoint. If you're using SharePoint, you have to buy and manage the on-premise capacity for content storage. In this section, I'm just going to talk about what it costs to put the bytes on disk. In the next section, I'll talk about what it costs to service, maintain, and migrate all that content. So if you're storing content on-prem, there's this 3-2-1 rule that you might be familiar with that says for every terabyte your users store, you need to store 3 copies of your data on 2 types of media with 1 copy off-site. If you don't do this, you have to be concerned about data durability and data loss, right? On top of that 3x multiplier, you also have to budget headroom for growth. You can't just have 3x capacity, because your users are going to add more content tomorrow and the next day and the next day, and bringing all of those disks online has lead time and lag, and you have to account for the planning cycles. So to account for the planning cycles, you need typically to have 50% headroom on top of what you're actually currently storing for growth. And you can see this is enshrined as best practice in documentation from existing vendors. In fact, those on-prem storage excesses are incredibly common in the industry. 80% of data centers are in this situation, and the other 20% aren't actually doing their job well, because this is the situation that you need to be in. So if you think about the 3-2-1 rule and then 50% headroom for growth, assume that your 2 production replicas each require 50% headroom for growth. 1.5 plus 1.5 is 3, plus assuming you can actually get away with a 1x replica for your tape backup. You're now at a 4x multiplier of what your users have actually created as to the capacity that you need to have on-prem. In comparison with Drive Enterprise, you pay $1 for 25 gigabytes. If you want to think about it in terms of cents, it's 4 cents per gigabyte. And there's no notion of breakage here. If you use 1 gigabyte, we don't charge you for the other 24. We literally charge on an average gigabyte basis utilization over the course of the month. Google, for this price, takes care of all of your data durability. We do backups and restores constantly. We run the backup system. This also includes all of the excess storage that we create for your free text search indices, for your structured search indices, for the fact that we OCR every piece of content that goes up to Drive. So you can scan a million old paper documents. We will OCR all of that so that it's searchable. You get all of that for this 4 cents per gigabyte. So now let's look at what the storage cost difference is between Drive Enterprise and on-prem. This $168,000 figure comes from the green section that I just presented a minute ago. And now look at the simple math for calculating the on-prem storage costs. You have a certain amount of utilization per user. I haven't talked about this in detail, but you have to have a RAID factor in there for read and write throughput, your number of users, the number of copies, and then the cost per gigabyte we've taken directly from the Microsoft Total Cost of Ownership calculator, and then we've amortized this over 3 years. So the figure that you're seeing here is not your one-time expense for acquiring this storage. This is actually what you have to pay on average every year to maintain your on-prem content, and you can save 92% of that. if you move on to Google Drive. So now let's talk about the maintenance, support, and migration costs on top of the actual capacity for running this system on-prem. The rule of thumb is that every dollar in CapEx results in $2 of OpEx. So now add a multiplier on top of everything that I've shown you, and I'll give you an intuitive sense for some of that. $791 per year per server for electricity. Doesn't sound like that much until you look at Forrester's total economic impact analysis for G Suite. For a company like Acme, they need to operate 4,000 servers in their corporate data center to serve their employees, and 400 of those servers could be eliminated by moving to Drive. All of a sudden, that electricity cost alone is in the hundreds of thousands of dollars per year. You have IT contracting expenses on top of that. So here is a not fully itemized bill for what maintaining and supporting your on-prem capacity is going to cost you. I say not fully itemized because this doesn't include your cost for training your IT professionals. This doesn't include your cost for going through whatever certifications are required in your industry. All we've captured here is the cost of buying and swapping out hard drives when they fail, which Microsoft in the TCO calculator estimates as being 10% of your total cost. The electricity to run those servers and the front-end serving capacity to actually get the bytes off of disk and delivered to users, and some IT contracting cost, and you're at $1.5 million for operating what seems like just a reasonable SharePoint on-prem content installation. None of those costs exist with Google Drive. There's one other thing I want to mention in this section, which is migration. All of the other costs that I've discussed so far are annual recurring costs. But there are some important one-time costs that can be big-ticket items, and migration is one of those big-ticket items. With Drive Enterprise, migration tools are included in the package at no additional cost. So if you were at Next 2 years ago, you heard us announce the acquisition of a company called AppBridge. AppBridge is the leading migration service provider in our industry, and they've moved some of the largest regulated and non-regulated companies in the world onto G Suite. The AppBridge team spent the last 2 years rebuilding a Google Stack successor to their solution that re-released last month. It's called G Suite Migrate. You get it for free as part of Drive Enterprise. It has 3 different kinds of capabilities. These are all tools that you can use yourself. These are not just tools that professional services organizations have to use on your behalf. It has 3 phases of functionality. Number 1, it has an assessment tool that allows you, that you can deploy to analyze all of your existing SharePoint installations and your on-prem network filers, and it will audit for you what's the content you have, what are the file formats, who are the owners, what are the permissions, how much data have you actually stored. You can then, given that assessment, set up migration rules, one-to-many, many-to-one, one-to-one migration tools to reorganize that content for the cloud, decide what you can delete, what you can move off to cold storage, and what you want to move into Drive. And then G Suite Migrate will run that migration for you and give you great tracking and auditing to identify what content has moved, what content might have permission errors. Like this tool is, in our opinion, the best in the industry, and it's completely seamless. And it supports all the connectors and sources that you're going to care about. It can suck in content from SharePoint. It can suck in content from on-prem file shares. And if you look at moving to G Suite overall, not just Drive Enterprise, G Suite Migrate can also move your email and your calendar for you. Now, migration is more of a one-time expense, not an annual expense, but let's not leave out what that cost is. Typically in the industry, these solutions cost $10 to $20 per user. So for a company like Acme, this is $200,000 to $400,000 on top of all of the annual cost savings that you've seen. So now let's total up the direct savings for getting off of your existing content solution and onto Drive. I'm leaving out a bunch of things here to make this conservative. I have not totaled up migration, for example. We're also not assuming that you're saving anything on SharePoint licenses, because we understand how Microsoft EAs work. Just the fact that you're getting off of SharePoint doesn't mean that you're going to be able to reduce your EA, so we haven't modeled in any EA savings here. We're just talking about the physical disk space and the service and support for running your on-prem content platform. Drive can save you 95% of those costs. And now let's get into the indirect savings of Drive. Number one, data breaches. If you're running an on-prem content platform, your small team has the responsibility for securing that entire heterogeneous environment. You're going to have a mix of tools, a mix of vendors, a mix of production environments from different vendors, and you have to somehow secure that entire heterogeneous environment, which creates incredible risks. Also, think about those statistics I showed a little bit ago about your adoption of solutions like SharePoint. When your adoption of SharePoint is down here, that does not mean your employees aren't sharing content. It doesn't mean they're not sharing content out of the organization. It just means they're not doing it with IT-approved tools. What you have is likely a shadow IT issue within the organization. Shadow IT puts corporations at significant risk. 83% of IT professionals admit that their employees are storing content in unapproved storage systems. Wrong direction. Our internal Google data shows that to be the case. 77% of the S&P 500 has employees that have gone and gotten consumer Google Drive accounts, and they're storing corporate data in their consumer Google Drive account without you having any ability to control that, secure it, set sharing rules, or extract any of that in an e-discovery proceeding, and so forth. And if there's a data breach, the costs of remediating that data breach are significant. $148 per record. The average data breach costs the typical company almost $8 million. Now, let's think about Drive Enterprise. I don't have the time in this presentation to go into a deep analysis of all the security capabilities in Drive Enterprise, but pull up the Forrester Total Economic Impact of G Suite report that was released last month, and you're going to see a detailed analysis of this 95% statistic. Features like our ML-powered data loss prevention, artificial intelligence, security keys, end-to-end encryption, reduce your security risks by 95%. Oh, and let's not forget that 1.5 billion consumers around the world use Gmail every day, and those users are the focus of constant hacking and phishing attempts, and our Google Accounts team manages to protect 1.5 billion consumers from that onslaught of attacks every day, and that same account system that protects those Gmail users protects you if you're using Drive. That reduces your security risk by 95%. Let's put that into dollar terms for someone like Acme. If you're Acme, and according to Forrester, you have a 15% likelihood of a data breach every year, $150 per record. A typical data breach is 100,000 records. And half of those data breaches would be due to the content platform themselves, and half of those data breaches are other things about the IT environment. Let's be conservative and assume that Drive isn't going to solve for those other half of the issues, and we're just going to solve for the half that are related to the content platform. That's $1 million in expected savings every year due to reduced need to address data breaches. $1 million, and that will get totaled up into the indirect cost savings in a minute. The final bit on indirect cost savings here is employee productivity. And what you're ultimately trying to do in IT is help your employees be productive. You've rolled out content platforms to deliver them the knowledge that they need in order to get their jobs done, but there are immense inefficiencies in terms of how people use these tools, and you can see that in these statistics. Just think about the number of times you've found out that you weren't working from the most recent version of a file. Or you had to spend an hour digging for a piece of content. Oh, what was that called? Who was I working on it with? When were we working on it? Was it stored in Box, Dropbox, the SharePoint installation? Is it on my hard drive, or is it in our network filer? What's worse, what if you share the wrong version of a piece of content with a client or a supplier or a partner? These issues are incredibly common, and they have a real economic cost associated with them. In comparison, in Drive, we have rolled out the most impactful machine learning features that G Suite has ever launched that address this. So I'll take point number 2 first and then come back to point number 1. 2 years ago, Drive launched a feature called Quick Access. It's this incredibly simple looking user experience. It's right up at the top of your UI in Drive. It's just this little carousel of 10 recommended files. under the hood, what we're doing is we're analyzing who you're collaborating with, the content of all your documents, the topics that you're interested in, what are the typical weekly patterns of your workday, and we're figuring out what content do you need right now. Over the last 2 weeks, we just finished a 1.5-year-long project to roll out a version of Quick Access that's essentially a new home screen for Drive called the Priority page. If you're a Drive user, you can pull up drive.google.com right now and you can see this. It's Drive as if Drive was rebuilt for the ML era. It's an entire page that focuses on using machine learning to surface the content that you need to get your job done. It has another feature in it called Workspaces that automatically identifies what are the projects and topics that you're working on right now. It clusters together the files for those projects and it serves it up to you so that you don't need to go digging through a massive filer hierarchy to find the content that you need to get your job done. We're incredibly rigorous in how we measure these kinds of machine learning systems at Google. Our data right now is, it's incredible to think of years per week. Those are units that don't normally go together. This system is saving 20 years of employee time every week looking for content. That's almost someone's entire career saved every week due to not wasting time. On top of all those ML and AI capabilities, we have good studies at this point that indicate just one feature, the real-time collaboration feature in doc sheets and slides, which no one else in the industry has a real bona fide version of this like we do. That by itself improves employee productivity by 20%. And we can quantify what these employee productivity savings are. Now, this math is way more than I could get on one slide, and I tried. So to get you comfortable with the number that I'll show in a minute, I'm going to walk through some assumptions. And if you want to see the detailed math, you can contact us. There's a link at the end of the presentation, and we'll take you through the details. But let me just get you comfortable with how conservative these assumptions are for seeing what the productivity impact is to Acme. Their workforce is growing. We're assuming their workforce is growing slowly. We're assuming that 50% of their workforce isn't really that collaborative. We're assuming that not everyone uses Drive Enterprise on day one. There's actually a ramp there. We're assuming that there are different kinds of tasks, and not all of those tasks benefit from our productivity savings right away. We're actually assuming very modest salaries for the roles that are involved, and we're certainly not assuming that 100% of the time savings turns right back into productive work. We're all human. We know that we like to take coffee breaks. We're assuming that only 20% of the time savings from our tools go back into productive work, and then you can see, we have quantitative ways of measuring our time savings. For Acme, this is $10 million of employee productivity savings every year, and as a CIO, you might not think in these terms, but your CEO certainly does think in these terms. And that 10 million plus the 1 million from data breach risk reduction, $11.7 million for Acme. If you think about this in terms of return on investment, because these are indirect cost savings, a 7.8x return on investment. So now I'd like to total up the direct cost savings from getting off of SharePoint or your on-prem file servers, plus the indirect cost savings for Acme. 1.8 million on physical capacity, 1.4 million on maintenance and support. The 1.8 million doesn't include any savings on SharePoint licenses. The 1.4 million doesn't include any savings on migration. $1 million saved on not needing to remediate data breaches. And the biggest line item of all, $10 million on employee productivity that's realized. These numbers, when you look at them, might not feel that they could possibly be real, but when you talk to people that use Drive Enterprise or that use G Suite, you really start to believe this. I talk to people who say, I could never work at a company now that doesn't use these. When you think about that kind of feedback, that $14 million 10x ROI number starts to become believable. That is the conclusion of the bulk of this presentation, but there are two final points that I want to make. One final point is, in talking with customers and prospects, there is a theme I hear time and time again, and the statistics show that this is common in the industry. You feel like you are in a really tough position because you essentially get all of your productivity solutions from one vendor. Your EA renewals with that vendor are a painful experience. They have all the leverage over you. You have no leverage. The renewals feel punitive, but you have no idea how to put yourself back in the driver's seat when it comes to your next EA renewal. If you adopt Drive Enterprise, you put yourself back in the driver's seat with an EA renewal, because Drive is part of G Suite. G Suite has mail, G Suite has calendar, G Suite has chat, G Suite has video conferencing, unlike Dropbox or Box. When you go back to that EA renewal with your existing vendor, if you've adopted Drive Enterprise, all of a sudden, you have a credible alternative. And as a buyer, that puts you back in the driver's seat and is going to make that EA renewal much more favorable to you. I've had customers tell me that they expect, even aside from all the savings that I showed throughout this presentation, they expect to save more than the entire cost of Drive in savings at their next EA renewal because they're back in the driver's seat. My second final point, and the last slide in this deck, we're running a promotion right now. Some restrictions apply, but likely, if you are using any of the competitive solutions in this space, Dropbox, Box, SharePoint, and so on, you can likely get Drive Enterprise for free for the entire existing duration of your contract. Please take a screenshot or a picture of that. Take down that link, contact us. We can go through your specific scenario. We hear from a lot of customers that this solution is incredibly appealing, but as an IT buyer, you can't have two bills coming in for two different products in the same category at the same time. And so we're trying to take that off the table as a concern for you. So you can get Drive for free for the entire duration of your existing contract. Please contact us at that link down below. You know, if you're so interested, there also is a self-serve buy flow there. You can get started. It's no risk for your organization because we bill on an active user basis. So if you think your employees are going to love Drive as an alternative to OneDrive or SharePoint, you can go through the self-serve buy flow. You can roll it out to just one team to start. There's no domain verification required. And you can see if people adopt it. And if they adopt it and they're getting value, you pay. If they don't adopt it, you're not getting value, you don't pay. We're willing to put ourselves on the hook because we're so confident about this solution. We're completely aligning incentives. All right, everybody, thanks so much. That's the end of the presentation.